1948, the National Party wins South Africa's whites-only election by a narrow margin of votes. They campaign on a single promise: complete racial separation enforced through law and violence. White Afrikaner leaders gather in Cape Town, drafting legislation to formalize centuries of oppression. Black South Africans wake to find their world legally divided into white and non-white zones. Signs appear overnight across Johannesburg: whites only on benches, bathrooms, buses, and building entrances. Police officers measure the width of people's noses to determine racial classification under the new law. Families are split when one child is classified as white. Another is colored based on skin tone. A mother stands at a government office, holding papers declaring her daughter a different race. The clerk refuses to change the classification, stamping the document without looking up at her. She walks home alone, knowing her daughter cannot legally live in their neighborhood anymore. Parliament passes the Population Registration Act, forcing every person into racial categories by law. Government officials arrive in townships with cameras, measuring skulls and recording skin color for files. Neighborhoods that have existed for generations receive demolition notices stamped with government seals and dates. Bulldozers arrive in a vibrant black neighborhood in Johannesburg. Without warning or negotiation, families pack their belongings into bags and boxes, while police surround their homes with rifles, ready kilowatts from doorways as trucks arrive to haul furniture and possessions to government-designated townships. An elderly man refuses to leave his home, sitting on his porch while officers approach. Police drag him from the house, handcuffing him in front of neighbors watching from across the street. The bulldozer moves forward, crushing the structure while families stand behind police barriers, silently watching. Thousands are forcibly relocated to a township miles from the city with no infrastructure. Rows of identical tin-roofed houses stretch across empty land with no electricity or running water. Women walk miles each day to fetch water from communal taps, carrying heavy buckets on their heads. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act was passed, making interracial marriage a criminal offense, punishable by imprisonment. Couples married for years face arrest. Police raid homes searching for evidence of mixed-race relationships. A knock comes at midnight. Officers enter a home, demanding to see marriage certificates and IDs. The husband is white. The wife is classified as colored. They are both arrested immediately. Their children wake to find their parents gone. Taken to separate jails across the city. The Immorality Act criminalizes any sexual relationship between white and non-white South Africans nationwide. Police set up surveillance teams, watching homes and hotels for suspected interracial couples meeting secretly. Black man is arrested, leaving a white woman's apartment. Both face prison time and public humiliation. Newspapers publish their names and photographs, destroying their reputations and employment prospects permanently and completely. The Group Areas Act assigns every neighborhood a racial classification, forcing mass population removals immediately. District 6 in Cape Town, a mixed-race community thriving for over a century, receives demolition orders. 60,000 people are ordered to leave their homes within weeks, and no compensation is offered or promised. Families who refuse are dragged out by police while bulldozers idle in streets, engines running. The community's mosques, churches, and schools are demolished alongside homes, erasing the neighborhood's entire existence. Only rubble remains where children once played, where markets once bustled, where life once flourished. The Untold Education Act restructured all black schools to prepare students for manual labor only. The curriculum removes advanced mathematics, science, and literature from black schools across the country entirely. Teachers are ordered to focus on basic arithmetic and manual skills for domestic and agricultural work. A teacher in Soweto refuses to implement the new curriculum, continuing to teach advanced subjects secretly. Government inspectors arrive unannounced, finding advanced textbooks hidden in a classroom closet during a raid. The teacher is arrested, fired, and banned from teaching anywhere in South Africa for life. Students watch through windows as police escort their teacher away in handcuffs. School doors locked behind that. The Suppression of Communism Act allows police to arrest anyone protesting government policy without trial. The definition of communism is deliberately vague, encompassing any resistance to apartheid laws or policies. Leaders organizing community meetings are arrested at night, taken to unknown locations without court proceedings. Family members wait outside police stations for days, receiving no information about arrests or charges. The African National Congress holds a meeting in a church basement, discussing strategies for resistance. Walter Sisulu stands before the group, proposing a national campaign of civil disobedience against unjust laws. Nelson Mandela, a young lawyer, argues for direct action rather than petitions or negotiations alone. The room debates for hours. Peaceful resistance or armed struggle, legal protest or underground organization. They decide to organize a mass defiance campaign, instructing volunteers to deliberately break apartheid laws. The defiance campaign begins June 26, 1952, with volunteers entering white-only areas and refusing to leave. Protesters walk into whites-only train stations, sitting in waiting rooms, marked exclusively for European passengers. Police arrive with batons and dogs, ordering protesters to leave or face immediate arrest and detention. The protesters remain seated, arms linked together, singing hymns, while officers surround them. Completely. Batons swing. People fall but do not fight back, maintaining discipline while being dragged to trucks. Thousands are arrested across the country within the first week of the defiance. Campaigns organize launch, jails overflow with protesters, police cells designed for 10 hold 50 people standing shoulder to shoulder. Women protesters face sexual assault and humiliation during arrests, strip-searched by male officers. A young woman refuses to cooperate during arrest. Officers beat her unconscious in front of witnesses. She is left on the cell floor without medical attention for hours, bleeding from her head. The campaign spreads despite arrests. More volunteers step forward to replace those jailed or beaten. In Port Elizabeth, protesters march to a whites-only beach, walking past non-Europeans' prohibited signs defiantly. Police meet them at the shoreline with attack dogs, straining against leashes, barking and snapping. Protesters kneel in the sand, arms raised, refusing to flee despite dogs being released directly toward them. Teeth sink into flesh. Screams fill the air, but the line of protesters does not break. International photographers capture images of dogs attacking peaceful protesters, images that travel worldwide within days. The government responds by banning all protests and increasing penalties for defiance to include public whipping. Leaders of the ANC are served with banning orders, prohibiting them from attending gatherings or speaking. Nelson Mandela receives a notice restricting his movements to Johannesburg, forbidding him from entering any township. He cannot attend meetings, speak publicly, or be quoted in any newspaper. Under threat of imprisonment, Walter Sisulu is banned from all political activity and confined to his home during specific hours. Daily Otter leaders face similar restrictions, effectively silencing the ANC's public voice and organizational capacity without trial. The organization moves underground, holding secret meetings in safe houses and communicating through coded messages. Members develop systems using children to deliver messages between cells, avoiding police surveillance and detection efforts. Women become crucial organizers, less suspect to police who underestimate their role in resistance movements. Lillian Ngoy organizes women across townships, coordinating protests against POS. Laws requiring permits for movement. The pass laws force all Black South Africans to carry identification documents at all times. Police conduct random checks, stopping people on the streets and demanding to see their passports immediately. Failure to produce a pass results in immediate arrest, detention, and often weeks in jail awaiting trial. Thousands are arrested monthly for passing law violations, filling jails, and generating revenue through fines. Women are initially exempt from pass laws, but the government extends requirements to include them. On August 9, 1956, 20,000 women marched to the Union buildings in Pretoria to protest. They travel from across the country, arriving in buses, trains, and on foot from distant townships. Police surround the government buildings, forming barriers to prevent the women from reaching the entrance. The women push through police lines, filling the amphitheater outside government offices. Standing in silence, Helen Joseph and Lillian Ngoy led the group, delivering petitions signed by hundreds of thousands of people. They stand at the door for 30 minutes. No government official emerges to receive the petitions. The women begin singing, their voices rising together. Wathinta Bufazai, Wathinta Bokado. You strike a woman, you strike a rock. They stand for hours in complete silence after singing, then disperse peacefully without a single arrest. The government ignores the protest publicly but privately debates. The threat of organized women's resistance. Past law enforcement intensifies. Police increase raids in townships, arresting women for lacking proper documentation. In December 1956, police conducted raids before dawn, arresting 156 leaders of the resistance movement nationwide. They are charged with high treason, accused of conspiring to overthrow the state through violent revolution. The treason trial begins, becoming the longest trial in South African legal history, lasting over 4 years. Defendants appear in court daily, ungovernable, to work, their families struggling without income or financial support. The prosecution presents thousands of documents as evidence, speeches, pamphlets, meeting notes, and letters seized in raids. Nelson Mandela conducts his own defense, state witnesses and exposing contradictions in their testimony. The trial drains resources from the resistance movement, exactly as the government intended when filing charges. Legal fees consume donations. Families of the accused face eviction and poverty during the trial's duration. Despite this, the defendants maintain public dignity, arriving at court in organized groups, singing and chanting. International observers attend the trial, noting the lack of evidence supporting charges of violent conspiracy. Meanwhile, resistance continues in townships through boycotts, strikes, and underground organizational efforts despite crackdowns. Workers in Johannesburg organize a bus boycott after companies raise fares without increasing wages to match. Thousands walk 10 miles each way to work rather than pay increased fares. Continuing for months, Alexandra Township residents leave home at 4 a.m., walking in organized groups along highways into the city. White employers watch workers arrive exhausted, productivity dropping, but the boycott holds firm for months. The bus companies eventually reduce fares after losing revenue. Workers celebrate a rare victory against economic oppression, but police respond by arresting boycott organizers, charging them with intimidation and conspiracy to damage businesses. The government pursues new laws making boycotts illegal, threatening organizers with imprisonment and hard labor. In Sharpeville, a township south of Johannesburg, resistance organizers plan a mass anti-pass demonstration. The Pan-Africanist Congress calls for a national day of action. Leave Passus at home, March 21st, 1960. Thousands gather at the Sharpeville police station without their passports. Planned, they come peacefully, intending to be arrested en masse, overwhelming the system through civil disobedience. Police surround the station with armored vehicles, officers taking positions with rifles loaded and ready. The crowd grows throughout. The morning, police reinforcements arrive, tension rising with each passing hour steadily. Children play near the edges of the crowd. Women sing hymns. Men talk quietly in groups. A police officer orders the crowd to disperse. Few people hear him over the sound of voices. Gatsamong throws a stone. It clinks against the police vehicle's metal side, barely making a sound. Police open fire without warning, aiming directly into the crowd at chest height and sustained automatic fire. People scream and run. Bullets strike back as protesters flee. Falling face down on the ground, the shooting continues for nearly a minute. Bullets ripping through bodies already lying motionless on the ground. 69 people die, including children. 108 are wounded, most shot in the back. Pools of blood spread across the dirt. Shoes and belongings were scattered where people fell or ran. Police prevent ambulances from entering for nearly an hour, and wounded people are bleeding out on the ground. Photographers capture images of bodies lying in rows. The pictures reach international newspapers within hours. The world sees South African police shooting unarmed civilians in the back while they ran for safety. The United Nations Security Council meets an emergency session condemning South Africa for the Sharpeville massacre. International pressure mounts. Foreign governments recall ambassadors, impose sanctions, and freeze economic investments in South Africa. The South African government declares a state of emergency, banning the ANC and PAC entirely nationwide. Thousands are arrested in midnight raids. Anyone suspected of supporting banned organizations faces indefinite detention. Nelson Mandela goes underground, moving between safe houses, disguising himself to avoid arrest and capture. He becomes known as the Black Pimpernel, appearing at secret meetings, then vanishing before police arrive. The ANC abandons nonviolent resistance, forming Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, as an armed wing. Mandela travels secretly to Ethiopia and Algeria, receiving military training from guerrilla warfare instructors and leaders. He returns to South Africa with plans for sabotage, campaigns targeting government infrastructure, not human lives. On December 16, 1961, bombs exploded simultaneously at government buildings and power stations across the country. The explosions occur at night when buildings are empty, designed to cause property damage without casualties. Leaflets left at bombing sites explain, the government has has left us no choice but armed resistance. Police launch massive manhunts, raiding homes and arresting anyone suspected of involvement in the bombing campaign. Mandela continues coordinating operations while evading capture, moving every few nights between different safe houses carefully. On August 5, 1962, police set up a roadblock on a rural road outside Howick. A car approaches. The driver is disguised as a chauffeur, wearing a worker's cap pulled low. Police signal the car to stop. Officers recognize Nelson Mandela despite his disguise and false identity papers. He is arrested after 17 months underground. His capture making headlines across South Africa and internationally. The trial begins. Mandela appears in court wearing traditional Xhosa clothing, refusing to recognize the court's authority. He conducts his own defense, transforming the trial into a political platform for exposing apartheid's brutality. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination, he tells the court. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together. His voice is steady, unwavering, as police and spectators lean forward to hear his final words. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. He pauses, looking directly at the judge, the courtroom holding its breath in complete silence. But, if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. The courtroom erupts. Police rush to restore order, but the words have already been spoken and heard. International pressure builds. World leaders call for Mandela's release, warning of consequences for execution or harsh sentencing. The judge sentenced Mandela to life. Imprisonment, avoiding a death sentence under intense international scrutiny and pressure. He is taken to Robben Island, a maximum security prison on a rock in the Atlantic Ocean. The prison holds political prisoners in harsh conditions, hard labor breaking rocks in a limestone quarry daily. Mandela and others wake at 5:30 a.m., eat porridge, then march to the quarry under armed guard. They break rocks with hammers under the hot sun for 8 hours. Without adequate water or breaks, guards harass prisoners constantly, looking for any excuse to punish or extend sentences through additional charges. Letters from family are censored heavily, sometimes arriving with entire paragraphs blacked out by prison officials. Visits are limited to 30 minutes twice yearly, conducted through glass with poor communication systems installed. Mandela's wife, Winnie, faces constant police harassment, is arrested repeatedly, and is banned from political activity entirely. She is restricted to Orlando Township, forbidden from leaving Johannesburg or speaking publicly about her husband. Police raid Ome at night, ransacking rooms and seizing letters, photographs, and personal belongings. As evidence, her phone is tapped. Informants follow her movements. Employers are pressured to fire her from jobs. She refuses to break, organizing community projects and becoming a symbol of resistance despite constant oppression. Outside prison walls, the struggle continues through strikes, protests, and underground resistance networks operated secretly. Students in Soweto grow increasingly frustrated with Bantu education, denying them quality learning and future opportunities. The government mandates that half of all classes be taught in Afrikaans, the language of oppression. Students understand this as another tool to limit their education and prepare them only for servitude. On June 16, 1976, students organized a peaceful march protesting the language requirement in schools. 15,000 students gather many in school uniforms, carrying signs demanding education in English. They march through township streets, singing and chanting. Police watching from armored vehicles strategically positioned ahead near Orlando West High School. Police block the route, with vehicles and officers holding rifles. Students stop, uncertain, as leaders attempt to negotiate a path forward through the police barrier lines. Police fire tear gas into the crowd. Students scatter, coughing and crying, some falling in chaos. A 13-year-old boy, Hector Pieterson, is shot in the chest by police as he runs. His sister screams. A student picks up Hector's body, running toward help with the sister following. A photographer captures the moment. The dying child, the desperate runner, the sister's anguished face forever. The image spreads worldwide within hours, showing the world South Africa's government shooted children for protesting. The uprising spreads beyond students across the country walk out of schools in solidarity. Police respond with increasing violence, shooting into crowds of teenagers armed only with stones and courage. Over the next few months, more than 500 students are killed by police during protests nationwide. Thousands more are arrested, tortured, or disappear into detention without charges or trial proceedings begun. The government imposes strict media censorship, forbidding journalists from reporting on protests or police violence. Foreign journalists are expelled. Local reporters faced arrest for publishing stories critical of government actions. Despite this, information flows out through underground networks, church groups, and international anti-apartheid movements coordinating. Globally, the world watches as South Africa descends into open warfare between the state and its youth. Economic sanctions tighten. Corporations withdraw investments. International isolation becomes complete and economically devastating over time, but the government refuses to negotiate or reform, instead increasing police powers and detention without trailer resistance underground grows stronger, recruiting thousands of students radicalized by police violence and repression. Young people flee across borders to join Umkhonto we Sizwe in exile. Training for arms struggle, they return secretly, conducting sabotage operations against government and military targets across South Africa. Strategically, the cycle of resistance and repression intensifies, neither side willing to back down or compromise. Years pass. In stalemate, the government cannot crush resistance, but resistance cannot overthrow the government. Inside Robben Island, Mandela and other prisoners hear reports of uprisings filtering through censored letters. Slowly they maintain discipline, studying, organizing, and preparing for a freedom they cannot see, but refuse to abandon. The limestone quarry becomes a university. Prisoners teach each other law, history, languages, and political theory. They debate strategies for the future, arguing late into nights about negotiation versus revolution, reconciliation versus justice. Winnie Mandela endures another arrest, another banning order, another night in detention without charges. She emerges each time more determined, organizing women in townships to resist, to survive, to fight. The resistance has no end in sight, no clear path to victory visible on any horizon, but it continues day after day, in courtrooms and classrooms, in prisons and townships, in South Africa and abroad. The struggle has transformed from protests to warfare, from hope to grim determination, from leaders to leaderless. Masuzuri arrest creates 5 new organizers. Every shooting creates 100 new resistors joining the fight. The government cannot kill enough people to stop resistance. Resistance cannot kill enough to topple the government, and so it continues, locked in brutal stalemate. Neither victory nor defeat visible anywhere ahead. The 1980s began with South Africa, locked in a state of perpetual crisis and violence. Townships burn nightly. Police conduct raids at dawn, dragging people from beds into armored vehicles. The government declares successive states of emergency, suspending what few legal protections existed for black South Africans. Detention without trial becomes routine. People disappear into police cells for months without charges or hearings. Torture is systematic. Electric shocks, beatings, sleep deprivation. Mock executions designed to extract information and confessions. A young activist named Steve Biko is arrested at a roadblock in Eastern Cape Province. Police take him to Port Elizabeth, holding him naked in a cell for days without foot. Interrogators beat him repeatedly, demanding the names of other activists and details of underground networks. Operating secretly, Biko refuses to speak. Officers intensified beatings until his brain swells from repeated blows to the skull. He slips into a coma. Police transport him 700 miles to Preet. Naked in a truck, he dies. September 12, 1977, the 46th detainee to die in police custody that year. Alone, police claim he died from a hunger strike. Autopsy reveals massive head trauma and brain damage. The inquest clears the police of wrongdoing. The magistrate accepts their testimony without questioning the obvious contradictions. Clearly, international outrage follows. The UN Security Council imposes a mandatory arms embargo against South Africa. Foreign governments condemn the killing. The trade continues. Sanctions remain partial, and support flows to resistance movements inside South Africa. Funerals for killed. Activists become massive political rallies. Despite government bans on gatherings, thousands attend Biko's funeral. Police surrounding the cemetery with rifles and armored vehicles, positioned strategically nearby. Bishop Desmond Tutu delivers the eulogy, calling Biko's death murder and demanding justice from a silent government. Crowd sings liberation songs. Police record attendees on film, marking faces for future arrest and intimidation within weeks. Dozens of funeral attendees receive banning orders or detention notices delivered by police at night. Government bans black consciousness organizations, driving the movement deeper underground into clandestine operations, and cell students continue organizing despite arrests, creating networks that police struggled to penetrate or destroy completely over time. In townships, communities community organizations form street committees to govern neighborhoods where police have lost effective control entirely. Residents erect barricades at township entrances, stopping police vehicles and demanding they leave immediately or face consequences. Men, armed with stones and homemade weapons, patrol streets, enforcing community justice against suspected informers. Necklacing emerges as a brutal execution method. A tire filled with gasoline is placed around collaborators. Next, retirees ignited. Victims burn alive in front of crowds gathered to witness township justice. De La Veta ANC condemns necklacing, but has limited control over township youth, radicalized beyond organizational discipline. Winnie Mandela makes controversial statements seeming to endorse violence, saying, "With our boxers of matcha, we shall liberate." Her words are seized by government media, portrayed as evidence that resistance movements support terrorism and chaos. She faces increasing isolation. Criticized by ANC leadership in exile, but remaining a symbol to township youth, police intensify their focus on her, raiding her home repeatedly and arresting her on fabricated charges. Regularly, she spends months in solitary confinement, a small cell with no windows, no contact, no sound. Interrogators work in shifts, questioning her for hours, then leaving her in darkness and silence. Alone, she refuses to break, emerging from dissension, more defiant, more radical, more willing to endorse confrontation. The government imposes censorship on all media coverage of unrest, forbidding journalists from even entering. Townships reporters who violate restrictions face arrest. Several are detained, beaten, and expelled from the country permanently. Foreign television crews smuggle footage out, showing the world images of police shooting children in the streets. A cameraman captures police opening fire on a crowd of teenagers throwing stones at armored vehicles. Bodies fall. Others drag wounded friends behind walls, while bullets ricochet off concrete and metal surfaces. Footage airs internationally, sparking protests at South African embassies across Europe and North America. Divest from companies doing business with South Africa, cutting financial ties to protest apartheid policies. Globally, musicians organize concerts, raising funds for anti-apartheid movements, keeping international attention focused on South Africa's crisis. Economic pressure builds as major corporations withdraw from South Africa, fearing both sanctions and public boycott campaigns. The South African economy begins contracting. Unemployment rises. The currency weakens significantly against international standards for months. White South African business leaders privately approach government officials, warning that apartheid is becoming economically unsustainable in the long term. Of the government responds by attempting cosmetic reforms, creating a tricameral parliament with separate chambers for whites, colorids, and Indians. Black South Africans are excluded entirely, offered independence in Bantustan's impoverished rural areas with no economic resources. Tricameral parliament was rejected by the colored and Indian communities through boycotts of elections held in 19. Only 18% of eligible voters participate, undermining government claims of reform and legitimacy among minority groups. Resistance intensifies in response to the fake reforms seen as insulting rather than genuine. Change rent boycotts spread across townships. Residents refuse to pay for inadequate housing in segregated areas without services. Local councils collapse as revenue disappears. Government-appointed black councillors become targets of community anger and violence. Several councillors are killed. Their homes are burned. Others flee townships entirely, abandoning positions and collaborating. The government deploys the military into townships for the first time, turning residential areas into war zones. Soldiers patrol streets in armored vehicles, conducting house searches for weapons, and resistance leaders hiding underground. Young men are rounded up in mass arrests and detained in sports stadiums, converted into temporary holding facilities. Families queue outside stadiums for days, seeking information about arrested relatives, held inside without charges or documentation. Children as young as 12 are detained, interrogated, and sometimes tortured for information about older siblings or parents. Teachers organize school boycotts, declaring education under apartheid worthless and demanding democratic governance. Before resuming classes, students stay away from schools for months. An entire generation loses formal education during sustained protest action. The government responds by closing schools permanently in some townships, arguing that students who boycott don't deserve education. Community members organize alternative education in churches and homes, teaching literacy and political consciousness simultaneously. These informal schools become recruitment centers for resistance movements, politicizing youth outside government control or surveillance completely. Trade unions grow increasingly militant, organizing strikes in key industries, mining, manufacturing, and transportation sectors. Nationally, the Congress of South African Trade Unions was formed, uniting separate unions under political leadership aligned with ANC goal. Strikes paralyze industries. Minds close as workers walk out. Factories halt production during sustained labor action. Police attack strikers with tear gas, rubber bullets, and live ammunition aimed directly into crowds of workers at mine compounds. Workers barricade themselves inside, facing sieges by police. Cutting off food and water supplies. Union leaders are detained under emergency regulations, held without trial to break strikes and organizational capacity systematically despite arrests. Strikes continue as rank-and-file workers maintain discipline and solidarity without formal leadership present to guide them. The economy suffers massive losses. Business leaders increasingly pressure the government to negotiate with legitimate black political organizations. Seriously, President P.W. Botha addresses Parliament, offering to release Mandela if he publicly renounces violence and armed struggle. The offer is conveyed to Robben Island. Mandela drafts a response read by his daughter at a rally. What freedom am I being offered while the organization of the people remains banned? His statement asks clearly only free men can negotiate. Prisoners cannot enter into contracts. The message continues, without compromising resistance principles. Cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when you are not free. The crowd erupts in applause. Mandela's refusal becomes a rallying cry. Strengthening resolve among resistors facing repression. A government is caught in a bind, refusing to negotiate, but unable to suppress resistance. Militarily, violence escalates throughout 1985 and 1986. With hundreds killed monthly in township clashes and police shootings, international sanctions tighten further. The U.S. Congress overrides President Reagan's veto to impose comprehensive economic sanctions. Major banks refuse to roll over South African loans, creating a debt crisis threatening complete economic collapse. The rand plummets in value. Inflation soars. White South Africans begin emigrating to avoid anticipated civil war. Conservative white Afrikaners form armed training for a race war they believe is inevitable and approaching. Rapidly, bomb attacks target civilian areas. A bomb explodes at a bar in Durban, killing 3 people. Another bomb detonates outside ANC offices in London, injuring staff members working late evening hours. Government denies involvement while secretly funding death squads operating both inside South Africa and abroad. Assassination teams track ANC members in exile, killing them in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Zambia with bombs or gun fury. Car bomb kills Ruth First, an anti-apartheid activist and academic, in Maputo and broad daylight. Toki. September is shot dead outside ANC offices in Paris by unknown gunmen who vanish immediately. Killings are designed to terrorize the exiled community and eliminate effective leadership. Coordinating international resistance campaigns inside South Africa. Hit squads target activists at night. Conducting drive-by shootings or burning homes with families inside. Police involvement is obvious but officially denied. Investigations are perfunctory and no arrests result from political killings. Activists live in constant fear, changing residences frequently, varying routines, and never sleeping in predictable patterns. Children of activists are threatened at school. Family members receive anonymous calls describing their daily movements in detail. Psychological warfare is intended to break spirits and force leaders into exile or silence through intimidation. Despite this, community organizations continue functioning, coordinating resistance across townships despite deaths and disappearances. Mounting daily, women play crucial roles in maintaining networks while male leaders face arrest, assassination, or dissension without trial. They organize food distribution, monitor police movements, hide fugitives, and smuggle information between isolated resistance cells. Sisulu coordinates networks from her home despite constant surveillance, house arrests, and detention periods lasting months. Gandhi organizes support for detainees' families, ensuring children are fed and rent paid during arrest. These networks sustain resistance when formal leadership structures collapse under police pressure and violent government crackdowns are ongoing. The United Democratic Front emerges as a broad coalition uniting hundreds of community, student, and labor organizations. It operates openly, but with decentralized leadership, making it difficult for police to destroy through targeted arrests. SUDEF campaigns coordinate rent boycotts, consumer boycotts, school boycotts, and work stayaways across regions simultaneously. ruthlessly. Overwhelming police capacity, the government declares the UDF a threat, arresting its leaders and banning public meetings involving member organizations are tried for treason in the Delmas trial. Accused of conspiring to overthrow the state violently, the trial drags on for years, draining UDF resources but failing to destroy its grassroots organizational capacity. Meanwhile, international pressure reaches unprecedented levels as anti-apartheid movements mobilize millions worldwide in coordinated solidarity. Campaign cities name streets after Nelson Mandela. Concerts attract hundreds of thousands demanding his release and apartheid send-up. Free Mandela campaign becomes a global phenomenon, his image appearing on posters, t-shirts, and murals worldwide. Artists refuse to perform in South Africa. Athletes boycott competitions. Academics sever university ties completely with institutions. The cultural boycott isolates white South Africa, making ordinary citizens feel the international rejection of apartheid. Voters begin questioning whether apartheid is sustainable or worth the economic and diplomatic cost to society. Business leaders form delegations traveling secretly to Zambia, meeting with ANC leadership in exile against government orders. These meetings alarm government hardliners who view any contact with the ANC as treason against the state secret. Negotiations begin between government intelligence officials and imprisoned ANC leaders, including Nelson Mandela. Directly, Mandela is moved from Robben Island to Pollsmoor prison. Given better conditions and access to private meetings, government negotiators probe whether Mandela will compromise, seeking to split him from more radical exile leadership abroad. Mandela refuses to negotiate alone, insisting on meeting with the full ANC leadership, including those in exile. He demands the unbanning of the ANC and the release of all political prisoners before substantive negotiations begin. The government refuses these preconditions but continues secret talks, recognizing Mandela's authority and strategic political thinking. Oliver Tambo leads the ANC in exile, coordinating international campaigns while maintaining underground networks inside South Africa. Suffered a stroke in 1989, weakening exile leadership at a critical moment of escalating crisis inside South Africa. F.W. de Klerk becomes president in September 1989, replacing the hardline P.W. Botha. De Klerk recognizes apartheid as unsustainable economically and militarily, but fears chaos and violence during any transition. International events accelerate pressure. The Berlin Wall falls, the Cold War ends, and communist governments collapse across Europe. The South African government can no longer justify apartheid as a bulwark against communist expansion in Africa. Western governments withdraw support for the apartheid regime, no longer needing South Africa as a Cold War. Elida Clerk faces a choice: negotiate transition or face complete economic collapse and possible civil war. He consults with security chiefs, business leaders, and conservative Afrikaner political allies about releasing Mandela and unbanning organizations. Hardliners argue against negotiations, warning of majority rule leading to white persecution and economic disaster. Moderates argue the alternative is worse: international isolation, economic ruin, and violent revolution destroying everything built. De Klerk decides to gamble on negotiations, calculating that a controlled transition beats violent revolution or economic collapse. On February 2, 1990, he addressed Parliament in a televised session watched by millions across South Africa. The time for negotiation has arrived. He announces, stunning both supporters and opponents with his opening words. He declares the unbanning of the ANC, PAC, and Communist Party, reversing decades of government policy. Announces the release of political prisoners and the suspension of the death penalty for political crimes committed. States Nelson Mandela will be released unconditionally, ending 27 years of imprisonment without conditions imposed. The chamber erupts in chaos. Conservative MPs shout protests. Others sit in shocked silence, processing the announcement. International media breaks into programming worldwide to broadcast the news. A Apartheid is beginning to end. Officially, township residents watch on communal televisions, uncertain whether to believe government promises after decades of repression and lies. ANC members in exile celebrate cautiously, aware that negotiations could still fail or collapse into violence. 9 days later, on February 11th, 1990, Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison holding Winnie's hand. Thousands gather outside the prison gates, waiting for hours in the hot sun to witness history. Mandela emerges, older, grayer, but standing tall, raising his fist in the ANC. Salute to roaring crowd is driven to Cape Town, where 100,000 people pack the Grand Parade, awaiting his speech. Friends, comrades, and fellow South Africans, I greet you all in the name of peace, democracy, and freedom for all. His voice carries across the crowd, strong despite decades of silence. Commanding attention and respect immediately, I stand here before you not as a prophet but as a humble servant of you. The people, the crowd, roars approval. He continues speaking about the struggle, about negotiations, about the long walk still. Ahead, our march to freedom is irreversible. We must not allow fear to stand in our way, but fear is everywhere. White South Africans fear retribution. Black South Africans fear negotiations will betray the struggle. Conservative whites form armed, malicious. The Afrikaner we're stands begging threatens civil war to preserve white minority. Rural township violence erupts between ANC and Inkatha Freedom Party supporters, fueled secretly by government security forces. Hostile dwellers, mostly Zulu Inkatha supporters, attack neighboring townships, killing hundreds in coordinated nighttime raids. Police arrive late or not at all. Evidence suggests they actively support Inkatha attackers against ANC area strains. Carrying black commuters are attacked by armed men who board, shooting passengers randomly before escaping. The violence is designed to destabilize negotiations, proving that majority rule will lead to chaos and bloodshed. Mandela accuses the government of fomenting violence through a covert third force operating with state support. Evidence emerges of police supplying weapons to Inkatha, training hit squads, and coordinating attacks against ANC supporters. De Klerk denies involvement, but credibility erodes as revelations continue appearing in media. Investigations and testimony. Negotiations began formally at the Convention for a Democratic South Africa in December 1991. Despite ongoing violence, multiple parties participate. ANC, National Party, Inkatha, smaller parties representing the political spectrum. Negotiating future governance talks stall repeatedly over constitutional issues, power sharing, minority protections, regional autonomy, and transitional arrangements are debated endlessly. The ANC demands one-person vote in a unified state. The National Party seeks minority vetoes, and federal structure threatens to boycott elections if federalism is not guaranteed. Raising prospects of violence in KwaZulu-Natal. Negotiations continue for 2 years, while violence kills thousands in townships, trains, and rural areas monthly. In June 1992, police opened fire on ANC supporters in Boipatong, killing 45 people during a protest march. Mandela suspends negotiations, accusing the government of complicity in the massacre through deliberate inaction and support. International mediators intervene, pressuring both sides to return to talks despite mutual accusations and distrust mounting. In September 1992, 70,000 ANC supporters marched on Bisho, capital of the Ciskei homeland, demanding its reincorporation, killing 29 people and wounding over 200 others. The massacre shocks both sides into recognizing that the collapse of negotiations means full-scale civil war is inevitable. Talks resumed in 1993, both sides making concessions to reach an agreement on an interim constitution and elections. The NC accepts temporary power sharing in a government of national unity for 5 years after elections. The National Party accepts one-person, one-vote elections with no minority vetoes or permanent power sharing beyond transition. On April 10, 1993, Chris Hani, a popular ANC military leader, was assassinated outside his home in Johannesburg. A white, right-wing extremist shoots him in front of his daughter, attempting to trigger civil war. Township youth explode in rage, threatening revenge attacks on whites unless government acts decisively against conspirators. Mandela addresses the nation on television, calling for calm and restraint despite justified anger and grief. A white man, full of prejudice and hate, came to our country and committed a deed so foul. A white woman of Afrikaner origin risked her life so that we may know and bring to justice this assassin. His words diffused the immediate crisis, showing leadership and authority exceeding that of the sitting government president. The assassination attempt to derail negotiations fails. Instead, Ingstith. It accelerates the push toward elections and transition. Negotiations conclude with agreement on an interim constitution, election date, and transitional arrangements before democratic governance begins. On April 27, 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections with universal adult suffrage for all races. Millions queue 4 hours in lines stretching miles, many voting for the first time in their lives. Elderly people who never imagined this day would come stand patiently, waiting to cast ballots democratically. Illiterate voters mark ballots with assistants, choosing parties represented by symbols and photographs instead of just text. Some wait all day in the hot sun, refusing to leave without voting despite exhaustion and physical hardship. Voting continues for multiple days to accommodate the massive turnout, exceeding all logistical preparations and expectations. International observers monitor polling stations, ensuring fairness and documenting the historic transition to democratic governance. The ANC wins 62.6% of votes, falling short of the two-thirds majority needed to write constitutions alone. The National Party wins 20.4%. Inkatha wins 10.5%. Smaller parties share the remainder. On May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as South Africa's first democratically elected president. Before a global audience, world leaders attend the ceremony. Former enemies sit together watching history change before their eyes in real time. Military jets fly overhead in formation, trailing smoke in the new South African flags, colors symbolizing unity. Mandela takes the oath, his voice strong. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will experience oppression. The crowd erupts in celebration. Decades of struggle culminate in this single moment of democratic transfer of power. But the celebration is tempered by reality. Apartheid's legal structure is dismantled, but its legacy remains deeply embedded. Townships still lack infrastructure. Wealth remains concentrated in white hands. Education systems remain deeply unequal across racial lines. Unemployment is massive. Poverty is widespread. Expectations for immediate improvement exceed government capacity to deliver quickly. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established, allowing perpetrators to confess crimes in exchange for amnesty from prosecution. Victims testify about torture, killings, and disappearances, confronting perpetrators with the human costs of apartheid's brutality directly. Some find closure through testimony. Others feel betrayed by amnesty granted to those who destroyed lives. The commission reveals the extent of state-sponsored violence, assassinations, torture, disappearance, as systematically planned and executed. But many perpetrators refuse to testify, keeping secrets about orders given, operations conducted, and bodies buried in unmarked graves. Economic transformation proves slower than political change. White business ownership continues dominating the economy for decades afterward. Black economic empowerment policies create a small black elite, but leave most black South Africans in poverty. Inequality persists, now increasingly within black communities, rather than only between racial groups, as before apartheid ended. Service delivery protests erupt in townships as communities demand housing, electricity, water, and jobs promised but not delivered. The ANC government faces criticism for failing to transform economic structures. Inherited from apartheid's deliberately unequal system, crime soars as violence normalized during apartheid years continues in the democratic era without easy solutions available. The HIV/AIDS epidemic devastates communities, killing millions. While the government initially denies the crisis or its causes and solutions, the liberation movement's leaders struggle with governing, discovering that winning freedom differs fundamentally from building a functioning democracy. Corruption emerges as officials enrich themselves, betraying principles that guided decades of struggle and sacrifice for freedom. Mandela served one term, stepping down voluntarily in 1999, establishing democratic norms and a peaceful power transfer precedent. He spends retirement years advocating for peace, AIDS, awareness, and education, becoming a global symbol of reconciliation. But South Africa's transformation remains incomplete, contested, and uncertain decades after apartheid's formal end in 1994. The struggle that toppled apartheid did not end poverty, inequality, or the violence embedded in society's structures. It achieved political freedom, but left economic liberation unfinished. A partial victory after decades of sacrifice and death. The resistors who died never saw freedom. Those who survived navigate a democracy that frustrates as often as it inspires hope. Apartheid ended not through violence alone or negotiations alone, but through both. Combined with unsustainable economic and international pressure to resist, movements did not defeat the government militarily but made apartheid ungovernable, unaffordable, and internationally unacceptable. The government did not surrender but calculated that a controlled transition would beat violent revolution or total economic collapse, destroying everything. Both sides compromised, each giving up maximalist goals to avoid civil war, threatening to destroy the entire nation. The story has no simple heroes or villains, only people making impossible choices under extreme pressure, and violence. The history they don't teach is the messy reality. Betrayals alongside heroism, compromise alongside principle, survival alongside sacrifice. It is the story of how ordinary people, facing extraordinary oppression, organized, resisted, and ultimately forced change, not through one leader or one moment, but through decades of sustained struggle, sacrifice, and strategy evolving continuously, not through purity of tactics, but through adaptability, resilience, and willingness to pay unbearable costs for freedom. The lesson is not that resistance always wins, but that sustained resistance makes oppression increasingly difficult to maintain. The lesson is not that justice triumphs inevitably, but that people can force the powerful to negotiate when oppression becomes unsustainable. The lesson is not that individuals change history, but that organized communities can shift the ground beneath seemingly immovable systems. South Africa's resistance did not create utopia or solve all problems inherited from centuries of colonialism and apartheid, but it achieved something remarkable. It forced one of the 20th century's most brutal racial systems to dismantle itself peacefully. Mostly, the cost was thousands of lives, decades of struggle, and compromises that still generate debate and anger. Today, the victory was incomplete, the transformation unfinished, the justice partial, the reconciliation contested and fragile still now. But the apartheid state that seemed permanent in 1948 was gone by 1994, dismantled by people who refused to accept it. That is the history they don't teach, not a simple story of good defeating evil perfectly and completely, but a complex story of how sustained resistance, despite setbacks, defeats, betrayals, and compromises, can break seemingly unbreakable systems. How people facing overwhelming power, and through organization, sacrifice, and strategic adaptation, force change thought impossible by most observers. How the struggle continues long after the victory, because ending formal oppression does not automatically create justice or equality, and how the price of freedom is paid by those who rarely live to see it fully realized in their lifetimes or communities.